We have an incredible guest today who left her home at like 5:30 this morning for us, right?
A little earlier.
A little earlier.
The North Star guided me. The constellations were, woo! I usually don't see those on my way to work.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I have been working with Kathy Teramy now for, how long have you been?
Probably 10 years since the first TIPS grant.
Since the first TIPS grant. And then when TIPS first came out, it was Linking Learning to Life, for any of you that are familiar to Linking Learning to Life. And they were like, I don't know if we'd call them the manager of our grant, because each district, 5 of us, put in our own grants, and then they compiled the data and presented it to the state. But 4 years, how many years ago did Upper Valley?
This is our 3rd year operating the statewide grant.
The statewide grant. So that's a huge, huge benefit to this region. And I, as you know, I'm starting my 11th year on that grant, and we don't know what we'd do without that here in Franklin County. So thank you. And today she will be presenting something we've been talking about for quite some time. Welcome, Eric. For quite some time, and that is, of course, work-based learning, and then the impact of Act 77 and what that means, and work-based learning coordinators and so on and so forth. So Kathy has started to present this around the state in various locations. And in fact, at the end of the meeting, we will talk about another time that we hope to have her up here, and that would be to do an employer event. And it's something I reached out to her on several months ago, and Vermont Business Roundtable did as well, and they hosted 2 events, right? Mm-hmm. And I attended one of them, and it really was very well received by the employers. So at the end of all of this, what I hope to do is have a conversation about when that might be, so that we can help the employers to understand Act 77. And for those of you like the technical centers or Creative Workforce Solution that is also working with the employers, it certainly can help in that issue too, because we certainly recognize here in Franklin County that work-based learning hub is about all of us that are interacting and delivering young adults and adults into the workplace. So that's our ultimate goal. So Kathy Teramy, welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so Kathy already did a great introduction, but just to give you a little piece of background that she didn't mention is we used to be a regional nonprofit organization in the Upper Valley of Vermont and New Hampshire. So I don't know if any of you know where the Upper Valley is. We're pretty far north of it, but it's Hartford and Lebanon, that area of Vermont and New Hampshire. So we started back in the 90s with a federal school to work grant, which Vermont had 5 school to work grants in the state, and New Hampshire had 44, and we were one of those 44 grantees. So just this summer we rebranded as Careers Click, which is an organization that's now working statewide a lot due to Act 77.
Kathy, you and I didn't discuss, and I didn't know if it was part of your intro to go around and introduce. Okay, thought it was.
Yeah,
I would be sure.
Love to find out who's in the room. One step ahead of me. I love to hear who you are and where you are from, what organization you represent here, because I know Kathy told me there's a lot of different organizations. And then also just to set the context for what we'll talk about a little bit, and to bring us back to who we're serving, youth. I just love to find out what people's first paid job was. And that could be even babysitting or a paper route. The first time you got some kind of pay for doing work. I'm still here.
Well, that was last century. My name is Wayne Goodrich. I'm the superintendent of schools for what I call the Northwest Territory. Quite aptly named, and my first job was working in the Cabot Creamery making cheese, yogurt, butter.
True Vermonter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Kathy Lavoie with my first job that actually involved a pay stub was as a waitress. Can every one of you imagine that? Yeah. I barely made it through the summer.
Oh. Go back.
My name is Richard Barwin. I work at Missisquoi Valley Union High School, and my first paid job was on a farm, doing farm labor.
I'm Mary Hartman, and I also work at Missisquoi Valley Union High School, and I'm a career exploration teacher there. And my first paid job was at Central Vermont Hospital when it first opened. I worked in the kitchen all summer. It was very hot, and I earned a lot of money.
Wow. Good memory.
My name is John Young, and I direct the Economic Development Program for the Department of Economic Development. And my first job was working for Ingleworth Construction, which is that's summer.
Thank you.
Karen Chesser. I am the work-based learning coordinator at Village Free Academy here in St. Albans. I think my first job was Caldors. Anybody know Caldors?
No.
Kmart equivalent back in Connecticut. Working there as a cashier. Sorry for that.
Good morning. My name is Katie Pell. I'm Business Account Manager for Creative Workforce Solutions over at Voc Rehab. And my first paid job was catering and serving waiting tables.
I'm Annabelle. I work at Voc Rehab. I work with youth and young adults. And my first paid job, I was a waitress in a nursing home. And the highlight was when my grandmother would come and visit with her friends. Otherwise, it was kind of a rough match for me.
Hence why you're working with the youth.
Yeah.
I'm Mary Brulette from VFA St. Albans. I work in the business department. My first paid job was doing inventory in stores from Hannaford's to small, like Maple Fields and those types of stores. Quick cash.
I'm Candice Lewis. I'm the Associate Academic Dean for CCD, and my first above-the-table paid job was at Dunkin' Donuts when they still used China. And had a counter.
Sally Gerard, supervisor for Department of Labor in this region. And real first job was babysitting. I'm surprised everybody else didn't do that. I thought we all did babysitting. But then beyond that, I mean just beyond that, was car hopping at the A&W, but not on roller skates. It was all down.
I'm Jim Naylor. I'm the co-op coordinator at the Northwest Tech Center. My first job, paid job, I was a petroleum transfer engineer.
Wow.
I pumped gas for sure.
I can just picture that on your resume.
I'm Nate DeMar, the director of Koala Career Center in Enosburg. My first job was working for police monuments, digging headstones or setting headstones in graveyards.
Wow.
Morning, Karen Brown, Franklin Grandau Restorative Justice Center, primarily working restorative reentry. Definitely babysat, but my first W-2 job was at McDonald's.
Eric Peterson. I'm the regional manager for Vermont Adult Learning in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Growing up, I had a paper route, but even before that, when I was about the age of 6 or so, I grew up across the street from the UVM campus, and I soon discovered that empty beer cans, hundreds of them, would magically appear every Saturday and Sunday morning across the street from my house. So I would walk those down to the grocery store half a mile away, and they would give me money for these cans.
Okay, wow. And I don't know when the last time was you thought about that or talked about that. Sometimes people say, oh my gosh, I haven't really thought about that for years. It's really a good way to connect with youth, to talk about what your first job was, whether you're in education or business or another agency. So we'd like to talk with employers about that, because connecting with youth and helping them and guiding them through their career paths, it's really important to find something you can relate to. And while you all are professionals now, well established in your careers, that can be a little far for students to relate to and connect with, but we all started somewhere. And we've come a long way since then, and so that's really helpful to communicate that to youth. So thank you for sharing that. One piece of background on us as well is that even though today we're going to focus on Act 77, which is is legislation that applies to grades 7 through 12. Career development really starts way before that with kids in schools. So if you just take one and pass it back. We'll be talking about this twice actually this morning. This is our organization's long time continuum of career development that we've used in the Upper Valley. Starting in elementary school with career awareness, believe it or not, our first programs begin in kindergarten, where we bring business people in the classroom to teach kindergartners about economics through the Junior Achievement Program. I don't know if you've ever heard about it. There isn't Junior Achievement operating this far north, but we work with JA out of Boston to bring the programs to part of New Hampshire and Vermont, down towards the Upper Valley. But just bringing people into the classroom and helping elementary students understand why people are working has huge value in setting a foundation for their own career development. And while the Junior Achievement Program span grades K through 12, I love the early elementary ones. The kindergarten lessons are teaching students what is money, so how to count denominations of coins and bills, how to earn money, how to save money, how to spend money wisely, and how to donate it to charity. Those are the 5 lessons for kindergartners. And on the second lesson, the how to earn money lesson, that's when 5-year-olds find out that their teachers are working. Because we give examples, and the first example is always the teacher, and a lot of these 5-year-olds are shocked to learn their teacher is working. They just didn't know that. No one told them that. They thought the teacher was made to be there, they lived at the school, all these things that and so it's really just a good example of how bringing people into the classroom can help bring some reality and some relevance to the world outside the classroom. And so the teachers who host those business volunteers, and it doesn't need to happen through the Junior Achievement Program, it can happen in any way, just bringing in classroom speakers to talk to kids about things and what they do for work is really valuable. And then as the students get older, those kinds of lessons and experiences get more specific and more intense and help them with the very first career exploration that they'll probably do in middle school. And that usually happens in the form of researching occupational data, maybe going on a job shadow. We coordinate a job shadow day for 12 middle schools, about 500 8th graders a year. And that's a chance for them to go out and explore a career, not pick a career when they're in middle school necessarily, although some know what they want to do. I don't know how many of you knew exactly what you wanted to do when you grew up, when you were in middle school. And maybe that changed, maybe it didn't. But to really give them a chance to go outside of the classroom and experience what work is like and what school subjects are used in the workplace. That's really exciting for them. And exciting for business people to share that, and really cool for teachers to help students make those connections between what they're learning in school to outside. And then for K through 12, we bring it to career application or career practice in high school, and that's where the TIPS internship program comes in, which we'll talk about more, in work-based learning, where students are actually working and learning at the same time. In addition to the K through 12 programs, we also do educator professional development around the whole state of Vermont. I think we've had, this is the first summer, this past summer, that we did professional development for teachers all summer long, because some schools receive grants from the Agency of Education around Act 77 and work-based learning. Usually we do most of our professional development during the school year. So things are really, we're seeing a lot of changes in the landscape in education around work-based learning and youth workforce development. And then, as Kathy mentioned, we also do a lot around employer engagement, and that's where we'll end today, and employer training, how to prepare workplaces for hosting youth. Many have been doing it for a long time. Some have never done it, but the demand has never been higher in Vermont because of Act 77 right now. So there are a lot of requests for employers to host youth in internships, and they're not all prepared. So we're really putting a lot of effort and energy into making sure they're prepared, they understand child labor laws, meaningful ways to work with youth, and what kinds of quality experiences they can offer. Any questions on that continuum? And this is our reach. As of the end of last school year, we had worked with about just over 13,000 students on this continuum. 850 employers, mostly in the Upper Valley region. It's only been for the last couple of years we've been working with employers statewide, and it's not counting the employers you work with. You don't count your region's employers. 600 teachers have gone through our professional development, and so far we've worked with 54 schools, and we have 17 schools sign up this year to pilot programs, so that number is growing. Most of our work that we do in the Upper Valley region is direct service, so we actually go into a school and coordinate the programs for them, and we've been doing that for almost 20 years. And the work that we're doing statewide in Vermont is not direct service. We're helping schools set up and establish programs, but they run the programs. That makes sense. Okay, so I don't know, there's a mix here of educators and non-educators. I don't know how well-versed you all are in Act 77 and how much you've talked about it at the WIB.
We've talked about it enough,
okay.
But
we can just give a quick overview.
Absolutely.
Okay, and when Act 77 was first passed, it was kind of elusive, and the state really went about different priorities in different years. And this past, I would say since February 2016, there's been a big focus and push on work-based learning. So that's the exciting part for us. Even though work-based learning was a part of the original legislation, the focus wasn't really there until last year. So Act 77 is intended to increase aspiration and encourage post-secondary continuation of training and education through these components that are all a part of a student's personalized learning plan. So the personalized learning plans are the big overarching piece of Act 77, that there is an individual path for every student, and those paths are flexible. I remember before Act 77 was passed and they were writing the legislation, hearing some people concerned about pigeonholing students. Why in 7th grade would we have students identifying these plans where it's really not that at all. It's really about having flexible paths, hence the name of the legislation. And I think people seem to understand that now since it's been out for a few years. So the work-based learning opportunities is the focus of this morning's presentation. So have you talked at all about the work-based learning standards with the WIB? I do have we don't need to go into this in too much detail, but if you're a work-based learning coordinator, how many work at one? So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so either co-op coordinators at tech centers and work-based learning coordinators at high schools really use these standards for work-based learning as a guide from the Agency of Education. I was on the original team that helped create these before Act 77 was even in the works. I think it was like 2009. The Agency of Education called together a group of people to help create some standards, because they did see high schools and tech centers are coordinating internships, but there really weren't any statewide standards for those.
There were statewide standards for co-op coordinators.
For co-op coordinators.
You guys actually
co-op coordinators. Yep.
You used our manual to.
Yeah, there were a few. These standards came from the National Academy Foundation, and a lot of that came from School to Work, the School to Work manual. And you are right, co-op coordinators have had endorsed, licensed professional educators coordinating what they may have called co-ops, they may have been called internships or other work experiences for many, 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 many years. So the real purpose of this was to bring up high schools to the same level of standards. But since then, the state has went ahead and changed the endorsement for co-op coordinators into the work-based learning coordinator endorsement. So co-op coordinators already had that, but now it's called the same thing for high schools and tech centers, right? So your endorsement now
I
is
know,
a work-based
and
learning endorsement.
I want to still call it co-op coordinator to
Yeah.
distinguish them
Yeah.
at Tech
Yeah,
Center
I would agree.
I
because
think anyone can have whatever title they want too in the school, but the
But
endorsement.
tech centers are able to place students in some hazardous occupations that other folks cannot
Yes.
because students are receiving the training within their tech centers. So my recommendation when the AOE was changing our endorsement was to have a level 1 and a level 2. I actually said just keep co-op coordinator and add work-based learning, but I guess the licensing is very difficult or something, and they said it's way easier just to change the whole thing. And I said, well, I still don't agree with that, but obviously I'm not.
There was a lot of debate, a lot of debate about that, and I remembered the level 1 and level 2 is interesting because I remember conversations in licensing around whether there should be 2 different levels, and they decided to have one.
Right. So
But
my biggest concern on that is that, and I think you guys are doing a great job with the trainings on this, is that the high school work-based learning coordinators are aware that there are these hazardous occupations that you cannot place students in if they don't have the training, and I just don't want anybody to get hurt.
Right, right. And so I think most of the work-based learning training addresses that, and that tech centers definitely have a whole set of services, resources, and training for students that is much more advanced than the average internship you'll see happen from a high school. So, for example, a high school internship is not going to involve chainsaws, but a tech center co-op could if the students are certified and go through the training and follow all of the rules. Because I know when I visited Hartford Area Current Technology students, the students are using chainsaws and have been trained for that. I haven't seen any high schools going to that level with safety certification and training. I think that's what makes and keeps the tech centers unique and has a value add.
Well,
Plus, in general, it's a 1 or 2 year program where the high schools are often doing a 1 semester internship.
They have the heavy labs, you know, the culinary programs, the building trades, construction programs, the automotive, engineering. So yeah, they're getting that specific training within. And you're right, they're often 2-year programs.
Right, right. So much more intensive, a totally different level. But Act 77, it doesn't require that students complete an internship in order to graduate from high school, but it does require that high schools offer internships as an option.
Yeah.
That's a big distinction.
That's it.
So there is a requirement, but it's not a graduation requirement. So if every high school needs to offer work-based learning and internships to students, they need to have some basic standards and some tools and resources and a person to oversee that, which is a work-based learning coordinator.
And then the other discussion has been as well is that every school has to provide that opportunity based upon these standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every student is going to do that internship or might be eligible for it. Some of the conversation has been preparing those young adults to make sure that they're suitable to go out into the work-based learning experience.
Not every student is ready. And as we move along here this morning and talk specifically about the TIPS program, I can give some examples for how different schools in different regions are doing that to comply with Act 77, but also to meet the needs of the students in the best way possible in their districts. Okay, so the standards, and this is, we share this with employers. This is an agency, this is an education law. This is an agency of education set of standards. But it's so important that employers know what these standards are because they're hosting the youth. So when we do trainings with educators around work-based learning and setting up internship programs, we make sure that you need to share this with employers. Just share the link. The handout that I gave you is just the 1-page summary of the standards, but if you go to the Agency of Education's website, I think it's a 3 or 4-page document for the standards, and there are indicators and examples for every single standard. So we don't need to go through them all in detail here unless you have a question about a specific one, but we already talked about number 1, every high school will provide work-based learning. A licensed work-based learning coordinator, we've already addressed that, they're the ones who are going to oversee those placements. Most often they're in the high school, but in some cases they're sharing that position because in some places of the state, the schools are really small. They can't necessarily hire their own coordinator. And some high schools are partnering with tech centers too for oversight. The work-based learning coordinators partner with employers to prepare the future workforce. So that's really a big one for employers to see and know and understand, that this law basically is saying schools need to partner with employers to carry this out.
The other discussion we've had that around that is that this is an education law. It is not a business law. So that partnership is critical, but it's also critical that our work-based learning coordinators, as the tech centers have for years, are respectful of that relationship, because the employers do not have to be part of this.
Right.
We want them to be. It benefits them to be.
And we have found that most are very willing to be, with a few exceptions. And a lot of times those exceptions aren't because of lack of willingness, but some kind of restrictions at their workplace, and then they can participate in other ways. And you might find that as a co-op coordinator too. Age minimums, confidentiality, hazards, especially for high schools, it applies more often, but they may be willing to participate in other parts of an internship program, aside from hosting youth. Work-based learning needs to be incorporated into a student's personalized learning plan, and it all ties in together like we talked about earlier. Work-based learning experiences are part of the career development progression, which is so similar to that continuum that I just shared with you. And in a moment, I think I have a link that I can show you how the state just developed their own progression this past March. So they actually just edited these standards to include that. Number 6 is work-based learning experiences reflect academic proficiencies and competencies. We'll talk about that next. And work-based learning experiences are compliant with legal health and safety regulations. It's the last standard, probably the most important, and what we spend a lot of time on is training both employers and educators on legal issues. Now, a couple of things I can share with you when you know what that looks like. So, one element to personalized learning plans in Act 77 that affects work-based learning are proficiency-based graduation requirements. Is that, have you talked about that in the WIP as well? And I don't want to go into this too deeply, and there are probably some educators in the room who know a lot more about it than me, but I've picked up a lot in the training sessions that we've done in schools, that basically students now need to prove that they're proficient in their content area in order to graduate, which is a little bit different than seat time, how long they spend in the class, what letter grade they get. So the Agency of Education has scoring criteria for the content area, and they have different standards that they use for science and math and all their subjects. One really interesting and relevant to the work that we do piece that comes out of the PBGRs is that the state now says that all students need to be proficient in a set of transferable skills. Now, maybe in your WIB, one thing we hear a lot in workforce development is employers begging for candidates to have soft skills. Kathy said it before I did. So you may be familiar with that term, soft skills. One tech center that we worked with for years in Hartford, they called them foundational skills. They said soft skills is too soft a term. These are really the foundational skills. A group of HR people that I worked with years ago called them critical skills. These are not soft skills, these are critical skills. Everybody needs them. If you don't have them, we won't hire you. These are not job-specific skills. These are not technical skills. They're not even academic skills. They are skills every person needs to work for us. So it's pretty exciting that the Agency of Education has established a set of what they call transferable skills. All the same things, lots of different terms. We have compared notes of lists of what these skills are, and they're almost all identical from employers and from the agency. So clear and effective communication, you ever hear that? Is one of the skills. There are many indicators within each of the sets of these skills. Self-direction, creative and practical problem solving, responsible and involved citizenship, and informed thinking. That's the critical thinking. When we poll groups of mid-career professionals, which we do often in our trainings and other places, people who are hiring people, usually people who work in human resources. When we ask them for the number one skill that they're looking for in a candidate, they usually say communication, which is the first one up here. The number two that they usually say is critical thinking. So those are both in the 5 categories of transferable skills. So in all of the trainings that we've done in the last year for probably about 90 Vermont employers, the training sessions that we've done, when we share this list, HR professionals, human resources professionals who do the hiring in companies are really excited that not only has the Agency of Education said schools need to make sure students learn these skills before they graduate, but they need to be assessed on them. So the agency has, let me see if I can find this quickly. Maybe not. Oops. So, that is really big. So this is straight off the agency's website. These are the transferable skills in all of the performance indicators. We're not going to go into these, but I'm just showing you how detailed they are. And then, if I can find this, here we go. Here, I can shrink it a little bit so it all comes on one page. These are the scoring criteria, how students can show they're proficient. It's up to each and every school to come up with their own way to measure this. But the state does provide some scoring criteria that schools can use. But really what I'm seeing around the state is every school is doing it a little bit differently. So it's one thing to say students need to learn these skills. It's another thing to say they need to show that they're proficient before they can graduate from high school. So schools are incorporating, and for years schools have been teaching these skills. So it's not like these are new skills for schools to be teaching. I learned many of these skills in classes, but wasn't really assessed on them in a standard way against my peers. And not all of the skills and not all of the students are learning the skills. So a lot of times what we find, we actually did a 21st Century Skills survey with hundreds of Vermont educators 2 years ago and found out that almost every teacher was teaching most of these skills in some way, but often to a very small number of students. So there might have been an elective class that 10 students took per semester that nailed these skills, but only 10 students took the semester. And then for the rest of the courses, maybe 2 to 5 skills were addressed. So schools are really looking at all of their content area and how they can make sure that all these skills are being taught to all of the students, if that makes sense. And the great news is that work-based learning teaches most of these skills. So schools that have internship programs can teach, give students a chance to practice, and practice is so much more important than the actual teaching of the skills. You can talk to students all you want about time management, but they actually need to practice to become proficient at it. And work-based learning gives them an opportunity to do that. And it gives employers an opportunity to be involved with the assessment of that. Only a licensed educator can assess those proficiencies, but an employer hosting a student in an internship can play a role. And I don't know if you've seen that in co-ops where the employer can say, the student was on time, the student communicated clearly with us. They can share their assessment of the students that the teacher can use to factor into.
I just want to offer a suggestion for those doing that. You're not going to want to give your employer the verification guides because these are education speak. So we created our own, we have our own employability system. And broke it down to very simple language. And we actually do have the employers assess or provide feedback with a much simpler student-friendly language, employer-friendly language, if you will. So they can use that to prove that they're proficient when they bring it back to the school.
That's great.
So either a letter of recommendation or just here's what the employer says about my communication skills on the job or at the internship. So they'll need that evenence to prove they're proficient eventually.
Exactly.
And I have a one-page, same kind of thing, but it's a one-page where they can check off and then write comments. But that's how they
So you've probably had these for a while, right? Yes. How well do they align with, because tech centers, you kind of follow a different I don't know if you're getting
pretty
that
much
same requirement.
All the same, except we have 8, but we have things like perseverance, because that's a school-wide,
Yeah.
grit.
Part of your school values.
And then the simple ones like the work ethic of showing up on time and prepared, which is
Okay.
like the first one that we introduce to our employers, because that's an easy one to assess.
So they align pretty well, but maybe even more.
Right.
That you have
They-
more things up there.
They do, yeah, but we make sure they align because they need to bring it back to high school.
Yeah, at our high school, we're rewriting those, because like Nate said, they're not user-friendly. So we've rewritten self-direction and responsible and involved citizenship, and we're working on the rest.
Great.
Because they're not,
Yeah.
they're not language that most people use when they're
Right.
trying to assess a kid or the kids themselves. So we're rewriting them all.
When at some of the employer trainings we've done, that I don't just, and this is not a training session, this is information I'm sharing with you and having a conversation that Kathy wanted to have with you today, so it's a little different. But when we do employer trainings, we ask employers to brainstorm a list of skills that they think are critical for their new hires. They brainstorm them, and then we match them with the individual indicators of the transferable skills. They almost mirror each other, the list that they brainstorm. So at least for the employers, the list of skills is language they're familiar with, but the scoring criteria and how to go about that and the proficiencies is not in the realm of their language. They're not assessing people in that kind of a way. So providing employers with a tool to assess students that's in their language and that's much more user-friendly.
To get their feedback so the licensed instructor can provide the grades, that's all.
Right, exactly. So that's a great point to make.
The DOL's had these on paper for years. I've been with the department 30 years and they had them back then.
So what are they
It was
called?
when we did work experience. Their timesheet that told the hours that they worked, underneath was, did they communicate, were they there on time, did they act respectfully, did they meet work site standards in the skills, the whole.
Those were the summer youth employees.
Yes, summer youth.
Okay, I was going to ask, what were you,
The work
summer youth.
experience is mostly used with youth, but it's used with some adults also who don't have work history background. So, but they've been doing it forever, and it was on a timesheet, and the employer read and either said met the standard, needs work, or is above or whatever.
Yeah, that's great. So there are lots of examples of that.
I think John wanted to say something.
It's just the interesting thing, and I'm not an educational person whatsoever, but I sit in between 150 and 200 employers a year talking about workforce needs and development. And on more than a dozen occasions, employers have stated that they need 3 A's, and I think I brought it up to the group before. But one was accountability, right, showing up and being on time. The other was attitude, having a good enough attitude, and those what I would call really soft skills, right, that I don't know how they can be taught, maybe by work-based. And the other with sort of our new generational is the ability to focus at the task at hand. In other words, put the phone in the pocket or do whatever. They're finding that we have to be connected constantly. So I really think I've heard that if I can get these 3 A's or close to these 3 A's, I can train just about anybody myself to do what the needs of my manufacturing or production.
That's funny, John, I didn't realize that. I've been for 11 years instructing what I call attitude, attire, and attendance, and that's what I do in the classroom with the students and just go over what that means and what situation or what circumstance they might be in which they need to call upon attitude, attire, and attendance.
People remember things in threes best, so that's good.
I think there were, some of us went to the work-based learning thing that was at Lake Maury, and they had us break into groups to look at some of these things, and they took a lot of the feedback, so I think the AOE is going to use the information that they gain from that to create more clarity around how to blend things. And so I think that's in the future will be available to make it more uniform and useful, I think.
And that, you raise a good point with that, collecting feedback. A lot of what the agency is releasing is new to them, but maybe using other materials as models for what they're preparing. But what I've noticed is there's a lot of rounds of edits while they collect feedback. So it hasn't gotten to a point where they've settled in on it. Like last year there were 8 work-based learning standards and now there are 7. And they changed all of the language to match Act 77 because the standards were developed before Act 77. So really things are evolving and getting to a point where they work for everybody and collecting a lot of feedback from people in the field. Which schools right now are hiring work-based learning coordinators. Some schools had someone doing that. Often a guidance counselor would place a few students in an internship. Some schools had well-established internship programs for many years. Some schools had 0, none, nobody doing any of this. So it's a whole range, but a lot of schools are hiring work-based learning coordinators. So I love coming to meetings and hearing people with that title. And sometimes they don't have that title. You don't have to have that title. That's just the name of the endorsement. In Springfield, it's a multiple pathways coordinator, Patty Davenport. And I know another school that has a flexible pathways coordinator. So they can have different names, but they're all pursuing the same endorsement.
I like that they were getting feedback from the people who did the work instead of, people at AOE coming up with the suggestions.
And AOE didn't have anyone within the agency in charge of this but now they do. They have Ron there, who was hired as a secondary literacy coordinator and ended up within 1 year of being hired as managing the work-based learning efforts around the state. So that's new to the agency last year. So she's wonderful. So there are people now, and things are just getting better and better coming from them from my observation. But it is evolving, and they are collecting feedback. So now's a good time if you have any to share it with them. So something that they did just develop last spring was a progression of career development, and they used models from all over the country to come up with theirs. It's very close to the continuum that we've been using for 20 years. But it's career awareness, exploration, preparation, and training. And this is what they're sharing as a guide for employers who want to get engaged in career development of youth and for schools that are setting up programs. So they do have it beginning right at 5 years old and going through the end of high school for students. So if that's something you want to look into more, there's a 5-page document on the agency's website, and as a work-based learning coordinator, you may have looked at this and seen it already. But it's a document that looks like this, where they talk about what each category, what each level of career development is, how it's defined, what the age range is, whether or not a work-based learning coordinator needs to oversee those experiences in a school. So it's a guide for a school to figure out staffing and oversight. And then examples of experiences, what those look like. So you see here in the career preparation for high school students, that's where internships come in. And then how to incorporate that into the personalized learning plan. And the one thing we share with employers at trainings are definitions, the really specific definitions of each of these things. Because sometimes schools are coordinating the same thing but calling it something different, so employers can get confused. What's the difference between a co-op and an internship and a work experience and a work study? And they hear all these different terms, and to an employer it all feels and looks the same often, unless it's a registered apprenticeship with some really specific criteria. So it can be a little confusing to employers what the different experiences are. And some job shadows are 2 hours and some are 2 weeks. So there's a lot of inconsistency around what we call things. And in some cases it doesn't matter much, but I think for employers having some universal terms and definitions, it can help a lot so that they understand it. And the other piece for employers that we have found over and over is that they often don't know who is coordinating what. So I don't know if there's anything you've ever talked about, but we have walked in and done a site visit for a student, and the employer contact will start telling us a story that we are completely caught off guard by, and we find out it's a co-op student they're talking about from the tech center, but they think we coordinated it, or vice versa. They think the co-op coordinator at the tech center is the one responsible for the student intern they have from high school.
That's right.
So there's some dangers in that, which makes it so important that schools are using the standards, following the laws, Because if something goes bad for one of you, it can burn the bridge for the employer for everyone. We have few examples of that, but we do have examples of that, and there's a lot that can be done to prevent that. So that's one really good reason to work together. We know some tech centers that are actually being kind of the middle person in calling together meetings of all the work-based learning coordinators. That happened in Springfield for a while, where they just contact every work-based learning coordinator at every sending school, and they have a monthly meeting. They talk and share resources, and that the hub concept here could really get at that.
We've had a work-based learning group that Jim and I started probably 4 years ago. Lose track of time, and we've only met sporadically. But it is the concept behind creating the Work-Based Learning Hub, which is my internship grant this year. And just making sure that our approach with employers has some similarity, that we're clear on who we're with, and that we're doing things that we can together.
Yes.
That we're knocking on the doors the least amount of times, that we're holding panel discussions and doing joint tours and the Career Expo and things like that as a region, so that it has less impact on the employers.
And that work is best done on a regional level. On a statewide level, there are certain things that can be really helpful with sharing resources and materials and PR, getting the word out to employers statewide, and by connecting with some statewide employer organizations like the Vermont Business Roundtable, Vermont SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Managers. We have been to 2 of their annual conferences to talk about this, and they want to become the industry partner for the statewide TIPS program. So there's lots of great things that can happen statewide, lots of great things that can happen very local in your school that you work with. But regionally, if you can manage that communication like Kathy has been doing and suggests even increasing, that can really make it better for everybody. So instead of competing for those placements, we can work together and probably generate more placement opportunities.
I just want to make a comment about utilizing the tech centers for some of that early on career exploration for middle schools, elementary schools, instead of having, I think going to businesses is very rich and all that, but sometimes it's a matter of demands. But tech centers, if it's a one-stop for maybe 10, 12 different careers, clusters to explore, plus it's good for just exposure to what the tech center has to offer, especially for parents, because tech centers have evolved as well from the past, and so that's something we do. We host tours of our local middle schools, and it's a good way to let people know what we're doing. So they're getting that check off for their career exploration by going and spending an afternoon in a culinary program or whatever. And it's great for the high school students to take on that role of teaching middle school. That's really good. The other comment I want to make was that co-op coordinators meet 4, 5, 6 times a year, and this year and towards the end of last year, and we were hearing some feedback from other co-op coordinators that they've noticed that since the implementation of Act 77, we're all trying to get kids right now, and that we're hearing from some high schools that they're not sending kids to tech centers because they're now saying we can provide that for you in our tech center in our high school because of. So it's just we support these efforts. It's just it could be an unintended consequence of these efforts of when we're trying to keep our students saying, oh, you don't have to go there. We can give you that. That job experience at the tech center, but so just when you're presenting around the state to be aware of that.
That would be right. So that would be very misinformed because we talked about earlier that there are all sorts of things that tech centers can do that high schools cannot do in terms of placement. So that's misinformation and kind of a PR job to make sure that word gets out there, the differences.
Well, it's up to each tech center to promote what they have.
And there are some employers who say, we only want the tech center students because we know they go through certain certifications. We know how experienced a co-op coordinator is, so it can be harder for high schools to place interns. And so it's really important to say these are 2 different experiences for 2 different purposes and explaining that to schools as well. When we meet with brand new work-based learning coordinators at schools, some schools they just hired them this year for the first time, we say the first thing you should do is contact your nearest tech center co-op coordinator and connect with them, communicate with them, make sure you're both on the same page and working together. If there isn't already a regular meeting happening, just to work on some of those things.
We have a great relationship here up here. So I'm talking about
other
just things I've heard about
yeah.
other parts of the state, and everybody's trying to keep their students, and demographics are down, and all that.
I would hope that it could actually increase tech center enrollment. And Act 77, when I had that slide up there earlier, one of the aspects of that is increased access to CTE. So, and that's a requirement as well of Act 77, to figure out how to make both happen. What you said about, you said two things. The first thing you said was about the career exploration for middle school students.
Yeah.
Most tech centers that we've worked with around the state have some form of middle school outreach. And some sending schools have to do it better than others. That's a really good point, and that can be a great way for middle schools to meet some of their requirements around career exploration, and the tech centers to make sure that those students are aware early on of what's available there. So that's great. And some do summer camps, summer tech camps, some do tours, and some send tech center students into the middle schools. There's all different ways that can happen. So that's great. Thanks for sharing. For us, for the last 20 years of putting students in workplaces, the most frequently asked questions we get from employers are around labor laws and liability. And that is the 7th standard in the work-based learning standards, is to make sure that all work-based learning is legal. And we have just gathered a few resources for employers around liability. We have to be very careful not to give any legal advice because we don't have any attorneys on staff, but we can point people to the right places for that. And the Department of Labor has legal counsel that any school can contact about their work-based learning programs, and any employer can contact about hiring youth in paid positions or working with youth in unpaid positions. Joe Anderson's the person I usually call first at the Department of Labor, but I think he has other staff working with him. One more? Okay, so I think there's only two.
Other administrative, but one more.
Okay. And even a lot of the long-time seasoned co-op coordinators that we work with say they need to call the Department of Labor from time to time because there are a lot of gray areas in employment law, and especially around unpaid experiences, because that's not employment. So there are laws that are very clear, laws that aren't so clear, and just different interpretations and decisions that need to be made. So we try to share as much information as we can, both the work-based learning coordinators and the employers, but then it's really up to them to figure this stuff out on a case-by-case basis with every student. So a couple of things that I'll share with you is we talk to employers, and we're only reaching so many employers in the state. It's really up to every single co-op coordinator, work-based learning coordinator to share this information with employers directly. But every single student that goes into a workplace needs some kind of safety training for that workplace, even for a one-day job shadow. So for example, where are the fire exits? Students need to know that if they're just there for 4 hours. So we talk to all of our job shadow hosts about giving students 15-minute overview of safety for their visit there that day. But if they're doing a co-op or an internship, they need the full safety training for that workplace. Larger employers often have a video or a manual, something that they do with all their new hires, so we recommend they just use that with students. Put them through the same thing you do for a new hire, even if you're not hiring that youth, if it's an unpaid internship. Because there's only so much that schools can do to prepare students for a specific workplace before they go there, because every workplace is laid out differently. So that's a big thing that we talk to employers about. It's a simple step that can really prevent some things, unsafe situations. Then when employers ask about liability, we share with them an example of what many schools in the state purchase, the Vermont School Board's Insurance Trust work-based learning insurance. And I just have the one-page piece of information that has been shared with schools and employers on what that covers. So if the school district purchases into this insurance, this is what's covered. So we share this with employers. If your school district purchases something else, that should be shared with them. There should be something that can be shared with them. I don't know what tax center you use. It's you use the same thing. Okay. So this is kind of the sought after document. So every year we ask Visit to send this to us, and they're great. Tim just emails this to us, and we share this with employers. We can't interpret, as a middle person, we can't interpret all of the liability. Employers have their own liability coverage that may apply in certain situations. So we say, check with your insurance company, and here's the school's insurance company. So we share that, and then they can go from there.
Kathy, if I just might chime in here.
Ooh, sure.
50 of the 60 supervisory unions use Visbit, but there are 10 that don't.
Okay.
And so just know that not everyone, they'll all have their own liability insurance, but it might not be Visbit.
Right. So we say this is, usually what we say is many schools, which I think is what I said this morning, but it sounds like you're saying most, but there's some that don't.
Right.
So then is there something else that the rest use,
Yeah.
or is it all individual?
Well, there's no one thing that the 10 use. They,
Okay.
Chittenden South Supervisory Union has their own internal. And I don't know if they purchase it from a local insurance vendor or not.
So I wonder if like work-based learning, like this document from Visbit is specific to work-based learning programs, so I don't know if those other forms of insurance have something specific about work-based learning.
Yeah.
So it would be good to find out. If a school district doesn't use Visbit, what we say is check with the business manager at the supervisory union of what the coverage is, because some employers require to see something in writing before they'll host that youth.
Right.
If it's unpaid and the student's receiving credit for it, they know that there's some shared liability there, and they want to see what that is. So thank you. So that would hopefully the supervisory union could produce something if the employer requires it, because that can be a dead end with placing a student if you can't answer liability questions or provide them with an insurance certificate. Sometimes they ask to see, could I see your insurance certificate? And our work-based learning programs mentioned in it. So we've requested that before and have the insurance company write a sentence on the insurance certificate about that. But this is the most common form that's used, and so we have this ready to share. The other piece that is even more fun to talk to employers about is, this is all the good stuff, is the test for unpaid internships. Are your co-ops paid?
Some are paid, some are not.
Okay. So if a student...
Once they're a paid employee, it makes it way easier for me.
Way easier.
So.
It's definitely harder for, I have found, it's harder for high schools to coordinate paid internships, because a lot of these juniors without safety training and training in job-specific programs like you have at a tech center, these students are really there to observe. The benefit is for them. The immediate benefit is for the student. That has to be clear. And the benefit for the employers is down the road. It's preparing a workforce that's ready to succeed in their workplace. That's the benefit to the employer, and that's usually something they're not interested in compensating a student for by the hour.
And the other, and we've all heard of not so good examples, and I think you guys have done a great job of presenting this in the way it should be done. But some schools, I've heard instances where the kid works at McDonald's, and they say, "Oh, you just have period 7, the last period of the day. You can go work at McDonald's. That'll count as your work experience." That's
and you
not
get credit for that.
That's not what this is about.
Yeah.
Just
and I think with the Act 77 personalized learning plans and the work-based learning standards having tied into academics and part of their plan, I think we're going to see some of that going away. And there are schools, which I will not name, that I went into a few years ago. They were interested in setting up an internship program, saying, well, this is what we have been doing, and they were examples like that, where the students were largely getting credit for jobs, paid jobs they found on their own with no academic tie-in, and I think that's been a long time. And in some cases, those students really needed to get out of school for part of the day. So it was probably beneficial for that student, but there was no connection to their plan, their education path. So now schools can really make situations like that work for the benefit of the student by changing those experiences. And some of them can still be paid. So this is something that the Department of Labor shares at their trainings. That sometimes we brought them into employer trainings, and Dirk Anderson shared this on one side with the wage and hour division logo at the top, the little flag symbol up there. That's the original Fair Labor Standards Act. Fact Sheet 71 it's called, which has the 6-point test for unpaid internships. This is what we were sharing with employers for 2 decades that we were doing this work. But just recently, in 2015-16, they changed it. They amended it just for the Second Circuit, which includes Vermont. So I share both the original federal 6-point test for unpaid internships, but also the ones that apply here, which they've just changed the language, made it a little grayer, but a little bit more flexible for employers. A lot of this applies to college interns, college internships that are unpaid, that oftentimes are required for their degree. And sometimes those college students can be worked pretty hard in unpaid settings, and the Second Circuit Court has determined that sometimes that's okay in order to get their degree. So for high school students who are going to do a 1-semester, 40-hour internship, they really should not be worked hard at all during that internship. They should be learning and observing. So very different than a college internship. So we like to make that clear. So if you look at the original side there, you can see what, number 2 is what we just talked about, the internship experiences for benefit of the intern. That's how we introduce the internships to employers when we talk with them. This is for benefit of the student. You have the long-term benefit of preparing that future workforce. That's why you're doing this, but it's so important that this internship benefits the student directly, and that's tied into their personal learning plan. We give a lot of examples to employers that are really simple that can help them determine what the threshold is for that. And so 2 examples we give is the soft serve ice cream booth. If you're hiring a student in an unpaid internship and you teach them how to serve an ice cream, in Vermont we call them creamies, if you teach them how to do it in about 2 to 4 hours of training, but then have them work the remaining 36 hours of their internship repeating the exact same thing and serving ice cream, you should be paying them the same hourly rate you're paying everyone else. Pretty clear experience, and I think every employer can take that and relate that to what kinds of experiences they have for students. If it becomes repetitive, if it's benefiting the employer more than the students, they're not learning anything new. But if you have them working at that ice cream shop and are letting them work alongside of all different people, someone who's ordering the supplies, someone who's working the cash register, someone who's serving the ice cream, someone who's cleaning ice cream, you have all the different aspects that they're learning over those 40 hours and they're not repeating the same thing for all those hours. That can be a learning experience in the same setting.
However, there could be something that they're doing continually, but they're building upon it each and every time to gain a new skill. So it's not broad, it's, it's that stackable.
Yeah.
And that.
But they're learning something new.
My example is our culinary arts and students already know how to wash dishes. So if I'm placing someone at Maple City Diner or whatever, they already know how to run the dish machine. I understand they may have to do it once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
They shouldn't do it the whole time.
That's right.
Sorry, Lynn.
Perfect. So you understand that. So that's helpful because we don't want this to be seen as free labor. A lot of times people send us internship postings and ask us to share them with our email lists. It's amazing how many come to us that are they say unpaid, great resume builder, and we read the job description and it's exactly paid positions that they already have in their workplace. So although we don't want to enforce labor laws, we have to say politely to them, we can't advertise this and here's why. We won't call anyone to report it, but you just need to make sure you know that.
In a quick skim here, it says for-profit. So does that mean you can work them to death in nonprofits?
So that's a great question for Dirk Anderson, which I've heard him address it. And if you've ever met Dirk, he is very careful in how he speaks and everything that he says. I'm not so much. I kind of jump and pop things out that are first on the top of my head, but he is really excellent at answering that question. So what we say to, and you can come up with your own standards as long as they exceed the law. And so we do that many times, where we say no matter what kind of workplace you are, you need to make sure that this internship is benefiting the student more than it's benefiting you, whether you're a nonprofit or not. Lots of nonprofits are employers, and if they have one person paid to do a job and another person volunteering to do that same job, that violates labor laws.
Okay.
So there may be some nonprofits that have no paid positions. There could be all sorts of areas there. So I won't give advice on that, but it's definitely something that we're encouraging everyone hosting youth in an internship when it's unpaid that it benefits that student. Okay, so and I know you wanted to have a lot of time to talk. I think we've been doing that.
Oh, I think it's been going,
good.
Which is fine.
Good.
Yes.
So just a really brief introduction to TIPS. You all probably hear Kathy talk about this a lot with the great work that's happening in this region. But just to give you an idea of what's happening statewide with the program, TIPS, the TIPS internship program, I think this is the 10th year of 11th. Oh gosh, the 11th year of Department of Labor support for TIPS statewide. There are many components, and every region and every school is carrying it out a little bit differently, which is fine. But I can just give you an overview here. TIPS has a career readiness course that has 14 lessons. It usually involves bringing speakers into the classroom and taking students out on tours. I don't know if Kathy's ever shared the curriculum with you. Some schools I know here have access to it. But just to give you, actually there's one 2-page handout that I have that you can look at the summary of the lessons. Here. This just summarizes the 14 lessons. Some schools use all of them, some schools use none of them, some schools use 5 of them, 8 of them. So we have schools this year, in an effort to comply with Act 77 and provide work-based learning and career readiness for their students. One high school is teaching the first half of the lessons to all freshmen, the second half of the lessons to all sophomores, and then every junior and senior is eligible for internships. We have another school that's teaching all the lessons to sophomores in a required social studies course so that all juniors and seniors are eligible. And we have some schools that are just at the point where they're teaching the lessons, but they haven't started coordinating internships yet. They still need to build that piece of it. So schools are really at all different levels with doing this.
For us here in the region, almost all of the high schools, some outside of the high school, and we have Restorative Justice looking at it, Vermont Adult Learning looking at it, have signed on, and none of them are teaching it and never have taught it, even though we're a TIPS region, completely. Most of them are using it as a resource, as a tool towards instruction in some way, whether it be through the work-based learning coordinator. Mary who has had a curriculum that's incredible at MBU for years. Mary Beck, you do that at BFA as well. But it's a resource. They're using it now as a resource. If in the future they decide that, of course we all have speakers anyways, we all have tours anyways, we all have a lesson that we're teaching in some capacity. In the future, certainly they could decide to take this full curriculum and instruct it in a classroom setting. Right now it's a tool.
I'll just pass the curriculum around. You can look at it if you want to, or just pass it by if you don't want to. But every lesson has a teacher's guide, and at the bottom of the teacher's guide is a green bar that has the Agency of Education transferable skills that are addressed in that lesson. And I'll talk about that more in a minute, but you can see that. And then within each lesson are all of the student materials. And this, we don't provide this on paper to anyone, we provide it digitally so that they can alter it, print it, use which pieces they want there. So I'll just pass that around. The TIPS internship program can include an unpaid internship, which we just talked about, that combines a really specific training plan with supervision. That's the big difference over other forms of things high schools might have been doing. There is a training plan that lists objectives and gives a method for assessing attainment of skills for employers and the educator. And there's supervision both from the workplace and from the school. So that's what makes it different than giving a student credit for working somewhere that they arranged on their own, that training plan and that supervision. The Department of Labor's Next Generation Fund currently supports 4 regional intermediaries, which the WIB is one. It's also a WIB in Rutland County. In Chittenden County, it's the Lake Champlain Chamber. And in Bennington County, it's the Bennington School and Workforce Partnership. And statewide, it supports us to provide the resources and training. Plus, we deliver the TIPS programming to the other 9 counties in the state. So we have high schools all over Vermont that are starting TIPS programs or maintaining TIPS programs that aren't covered by another region. Last year, all of the regional partners that we worked with reported 300 students from 30 high schools and 200 employers. We're going to see those numbers grow a lot this year as more high schools are taking on the TIPS program. And the lessons, last February, we updated them so they aligned with Act 77 and the EQS transferable skills. And they're available for free to any high school in the state because we have a lot of great grant funding to support it. Not just from the Department of Labor, but also from the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation's federal Europe grant.
Right.
And the McClure Foundation gave us funding last year, Private Family Foundation, to do the employer trainings, which it's harder to get grants to do that, and to make sure schools have access to TIPS that aren't covered by other funding sources.
So here in Franklin County, for the if you push that back,
Sure.
For the last 10 years, my numbers are somewhere around 500 over those 10 years. And with the new understanding with most of the area high schools and programs is that they will report to the WIB for the TIPS program their internship placement numbers. And that is, of course, going to help to increase that number, as Kathy had just said. But for me, and I think for the schools that I've spoken to, it also helps us to show within the region just exactly how much incredible work we're all doing within our schools, or within the Self-Learning or Restorative Justice Center, wherever that activity going on in Franklin County around work-based learning and how critical that is. One exception would be the technical centers. And Kathy is looking into this, whether or not the curriculum is open for them or not. We do have Enosburg, a Cold Hollow Career Center that has asked about the curriculum. But I don't believe we can report their numbers because you already report your co-op numbers. So we don't have to report those, but there's a discussion going on whether or not that curriculum, these lesson plans, can still be used as a resource and a tool for you in any capacity.
As far as this reporting, how many
You're
work-based
reporting to the
learning
AOE, we're
experiences?
reporting to the DOL, they can be reported.
Oh, they could? Okay.
You had it just for county-wide.
I thought I would put it as a side note, but you're right. I never even thought of that. That's
So,
DOL.
yeah, years ago, the DOL had some very strict rules on how the next generation funding could be used, and we couldn't report or use tech centers. Now, because the grants have gotten smaller, over the years, they're asking for matching funding to prove you have, to share that you have other funding for this. So now we're reporting many more numbers beyond what the Department of Labor is supporting. So the reporting requirements have become more flexible.
And that only helps us because as a region, we can start thinking about what other sources we might be able to find as a region for funding.
Absolutely.
And we're showing our full activity on work-based learning experiences.
So you all have the key questions. I want to pass out one other thing to go with the TIPS curriculum. That green bar on the teacher's guide, this is a matrix that shows which transferable skills are being addressed by each lesson. So when we talked earlier about the proficiency-based graduation requirements and those highly sought-after transferable skills, this is what TIPS covers in each of the lessons. And there are ways to assess these built into the training plan. If the student does an internship, what is missing from the TIPS curriculum is a way to assess student proficiency of gaining some of those skills just from taking the course, which in many cases they can really prove those proficiencies after doing an internship, but they also can prove some after just taking the course, because there's a lot of hands-on activities in the course as well. So one thing that we're doing is working on an industry-recognized credential and career readiness for TIPS, which was prompted by co-op coordinators in the state. We have 4 tech centers right now that are asking to use the TIPS curriculum, and this credential would make it much more valuable to the tech centers. So the AOE has told us we're at the finish line based on everything they looked at. The only thing we need is a third-party assessment, which we're building this year. And
Jason and Dave are pushing that? Or
yeah, so Jason was initially, Jason Finley from Randolph. And we needed an industry partner, with Vermont SHRM signed up for it immediately, and the DO, the AOE loved that as a partner for us. Then it can be available to both. CTE centers could use it now. Right. It just doesn't have the same value without that credential. Once we have that finished, hopefully maybe by the end of this year, that will be something that any tech center can use. But we're asking tech centers to work with their sending schools to coordinate how, if they are using the lesson plans, how they're delivering that, so students don't get them twice in the same year. Jason has told us, I wish kids got this every single year of high school, because so much of this changes. A lot of the activities change as you change. He said, I'll have them do it in middle school. Vermont SHRM is asking us if we can adjust the lessons to make them work for new hires in workplaces, because they said we get so many people coming to us right now that don't have these skills. We'd love to have them go through part of that as a new hire.
And we are actually having that conversation here in the region with Vermont Adult Learning and Restorative Justice Center, because we can see the value for that, the lesson plan, the transferable skills, a whole host of them for adults beyond high school. So
until this all catches up.
Yeah, exactly.
The youth are all out there.
Yes. Then we won't need. Yeah. You're right. So there's a little bit
before you go on.
Yep. That's just my last thing.
A leverage point for the sending high schools that will help them pay more attention to this. The new federal legislation, ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act, is requiring schools report beyond SATs and ACTs and all of that they've had to do in the past. So they show industry-recognized career credentials in how they report the accomplishments of schools. So tech centers
for high schools, or
every school.
Every school.
Every school. And so really, I think it's going to bring tech centers and high schools more closely together. In addition to that, the ASVAB test is going to be a component of that. There's some other TERCEL. I'm trying to think what the acronym stands for, but that's really broadened how schools demonstrate accountability to the public and to the agency of ed and to the feds. So never before has it been that kind of marriage. That's the perfect time.
Okay, I'd love to look into that more. Maybe I'll chat with that.
Kathy, just a clarification question. When you said industry recognized credential, you were talking about the tech centers. Isn't that the same for the high schools?
So,
we teach all of
so this could change that, this bit of information, so I have to look into it more. Currently, and you can help me out here, tech centers, do you have to have a certain percentage of students complete the programs that get an industry recognized credential? Is it 50%?
Yeah. Ideally, it's all of them. But
ideally, it's all. But do you have a requirement of a percent?
We have, like, our automotive program, right? We're NATEF certified, and so our students get a variety of industry recognized credentials in that program. And our public safety and emergency services, they'll come out with like 6 or whatever. But like in cosmetology or human services, there aren't quite as many for them to access, so they may do like a CPR, which is not, it's an industry
student could get, but it may or may not. Okay. So right now, I'm not aware of there being graduation requirements for high school students to have industry recognized credentials. It sounds right.
Well, there isn't, but I will say that there, of course, here in Vermont, or across the nation, we have 70 by 2025, which is part of 70% of all students, individuals will have credible credentials. So that's part of that movement. And I just attended in DC for the Vermont Talent Pipeline Management, and we had national speakers, one including the Secretary of the U.S., he's great, Department of Labor, and a lot of the conversation was around credible credentials and the impact they could have if they were being achieved in our high schools as well.
Right. Well,
so it's only going to benefit them.
Because I teach a career class that covers everything that you just said, so that would be the credential right there for career readiness.
Right. So in order to get the industry recognized credential, the AOE needs to approve it as a credential. It has to have a third-party assessment, it has to have an industry partner. It has
When
to
all
have
that
certain
happens
components.
though, can we do that?
And the third-party assessment can't be the school, it can't be the instructor doing it. So there are some components that you have to apply for it. So, and what I understand is the agency that right now has one industry recognized credential that's been approved by them in career readiness. And it's a online program and it's national and it doesn't talk about anything happening in Vermont. Where what we're trying to do right now is get a Vermont-based Act 77 aligned program approved for a credential. So you have to talk to the Agency of Education about that.
And schools are going to want to do that anyway because IRCs have now been, high quality IRCs are now the same. As schools are getting their reviews for the EQS standards,
Right.
IRCs are on that list, right up there with ASVAB and SATs and dual enrollment classes. So
Yeah.
they're definitely getting recognized as a.
And one part of the industry partner requirement for the credential is the industry partner has to validate whatever the program is as something they will take priority in candidates who have that credential. So SHRM is basically saying if a high school student has gone through the TIPS program, we will give them hiring priority. So that's what the industry partner is saying. So Vermont SHRM has been following the TIPS program for the last 3 years, and they were just a natural choice. They said basically our 800 members, people who do hiring all over the state of Vermont, universally will give preference to high school students that have been through the TIPS
Which
program.
again, not to at all discredit. In fact, we have some incredible career exploration programs in our high schools already. But if there's a reason that's a motivator for the TIPS curriculum to be delivered wholly, that would be.
And I think the agency will find out. This is really new to us, but I don't think they need to be assessed in all 14 lessons. I think it's like 3 to 5 to get the credential. We'll find out. So I'm speaking too soon, but I know it's not all components.
Oh,
so
that would be
while
great
it would be nice,
right? But it would be nice to know which 3 or 5.
They will help us walk through that process, but they have told us not all. I mean, you could have a 200 component program, and they're not going to require that students are assessed in all of those. There has to be a certain number of credentials that are actually printed on the student's certificate saying they have that credential.
Wow.
So what some high schools are doing, like Spalding High School, is they have an internship program that they started last year before they heard about TIPS. They are taking a handful of components out of TIPS and incorporating it to something they already started. And that may meet the industry recognized.
And that's what my point is that's how the curriculum here so far is going to be used. So let's make it
maybe
intentional.
One school's internship program doesn't have a digital citizenship lesson, which TIPS does. Maybe they pull that out. Maybe it doesn't have a workplace safety lesson. They might pull that out. They might pull out pieces that they don't have, but then keep the rest of their already established program intact. And it may still meet the IRC.
And that's what I'm saying, and that's how right now it's an intention here in the region to use the TIPS curriculum. But if there are specific lesson plans that needs to be, that's what we should know, because those should be the ones, if they choose, that Mary and Mary, especially in this room, draw out, or Restorative Justice Center program.
Yeah, we do the whole first page and some of the back already.
Yeah. So that'd be something that we could look into.
Wouldn't it be all around those transfers?
Excellent.
Okay, so boy, we covered a lot of ground. The only thing I had that we didn't really talk about as much was the training plan. You talked a little bit about what you use, but this is what makes an unpaid internship valuable to students, is to have the student, the work-based learning coordinator, and the employer supervisor go through, and this is a 5-page document. It really is the piece that adds value and ties everything together. So the student identifies which skills they want to practice on the internship, and then the employer identifies the tasks and performance goals for each of those. So it's really a shared responsibility between the student and the employer with that guidance from the work-based learning coordinator. And then we're going to be changing this a little bit, but what we recommend is having a midway meeting, but we actually recommend it happens a little sooner than midway through the internship, so there's a chance to adjust and troubleshoot. So we're going to change that terminology. But it gives employers, this is the employer assessment piece, a way to assess these different skills and aspects to the students' performance. And what we're looking for in an internship isn't that every student at their final meeting is advanced or even proficient. What we're looking for is change, progress. So if they started here at the midway meeting, they might be here at the final meeting. These are short. They can be 20 to 40 hours. So we don't expect advanced or proficient in every skill, but at least to see that they've gained something while they're there. So that's what the training plan looks like.
It's way more comprehensive than what I do.
Okay. So yeah, this is available if you want to look at it. But so a lot of times schools take this and they adjust it and make it work for them too.
You've mentioned 40 hours a number of times.
Yeah.
We had an unwritten, and it may have been written sometime before my time, but that 32 was sort of the magic number at some point that for an unpaid, I'm talking an unpaid, we call them CWEs, career work experiences. And I think that somehow came from the Department of Labor at one point, that if you're getting up over 40 hours or above 32, that it could be viewed as gainful, that the employer's starting to, I know it's gray.
Yeah, it's gray. And the only reason 40 hours, you keep hearing it, is because I have many years of high schools that had a 20-hour work readiness course and a 40-hour unpaid internship for those 60 hours of seat time to get a half a credit. That was the formula that schools used. That isn't the case anymore. So I need to get rid of that 40 hours out of my vocabulary, because it really should be individual for what each internship makes sense. And some students we've seen, they might do 8 hours at one workplace and 12 at another. And so it can really be any number of hours. But you're right, you have to watch out for at what point it turns into gainful employment, which could be more than 40 hours. So the 6-point test we passed around has nothing about hours on there. That's often a myth with employers, is that they think once they reach a certain number of hours. So it's different for every occupation and every job. But yeah, so I shouldn't say 40 hours anymore. That was largely because schools want to give those kids half credit. Okay, so I know we went a few minutes over, but
that's all right. Thank you. It allowed us to have conversation as you presented, and that was great. So certainly it was very valuable, and I've seen it a few times, and it's still very valuable. As a region, I think personally, having worked with other regions in the state, we're far ahead on a lot of this, at least in the instruction piece of it, and what we're doing in our classrooms. We have some great programs here that have been going on for 10 years. I keep looking at Mary because the career exploration classroom has, 10 years ago we wrote a grant for that. So, and now though, we are at a different stage, and it means that the role of the WIB and myself changes as well. And that's what this transition period is about. That's what the new TIPS grant that I applied for is about. I'll still be working with individual students for support and placement, as I always have. And I do carry all that insurance and all of that to do that. And I'll continue to work as a resource for the Creative Workforce Solutions, folk rehab, restorative justice, Vermont adult learning. I'm still here for that. But part of that TIPS grant this year will be about us really perfecting this in the region and making sure that work-based learning experience, whether it's for our high schools, kids, or adults in our region, that it's a good experience for them, and that our employers see it as being valuable, although it may not be immediate for them, although in some cases it absolutely is immediate value. So our next steps would be the employer engagement, and in fact 2 years ago, Wynn and Dennis and I put together a letter to the businesses that I just wanted to reach out to the businesses in fear of all these knocks and who are the players and how much time is being spent. And I didn't send the letter, and usually when I hesitate there's a reason, and that was I don't think we were prepared as a group to reach out in that way, and I think we're there now. So there'll be some back and forth here on doing that employer engagement process, and we'll decide as a group how we're going to do that and what training we're going to have. I know that the one I attended in Burlington with Vermont Business Roundtable was good. I'm hearing the one that occurred in the southern part of the state was even better. Rutland area was even, for whatever reason, Lisa thought that it really was more succinct. And we'll start that. And we'll use other partners in this region to reach out to those employers. Tim Smith is here from FCIDC, and of course co-op coordinators, and we'll make sure that we do the best that we can, as well as our HR roundtable that periodically in the region gets called together. Yes, Tim?
I have two comments. One is, I think in Franklin County we're situated pretty good, but I'm just curious. I think capacity becomes an issue. I think in the Newport area, I mean, you've got 2 or 3 major high schools in the Orleans region with a limited number of employers. And I think even here with our 5 high schools, I'm wondering, how do you address the capacity issue and trying to place all the kids that you're trying to place into a work-based learning experience?
And that's part of what the Work-Based Learning Hub is about, is that I think
that's much for you, Kathy.
Well, I think it's handled regionally, right?
Yeah, I think regionally, we had mentioned that earlier, to do those connections between the co-op coordinators and the work-based learning coordinators and the organizations working with employers, any kind of business and industry associations, human resources associations, chambers of commerce, to get people
I understand that, but I'm just saying I think there's a capacity issue where there's not enough places.
So many places,
students.
yeah.
So how does the state view that if they can't place enough students? That was one thought.
Well, also too, the other piece of this is that, as you may not have been here, every school has to offer a work-based learning experience program. It does not mean that every student has to or will go through that. And there needs to be, just like the programs that I've created over the year for that vetting, to make sure that the student is ready to go out. And as Jim and the tech centers, Nate, have done for years, is that not every kid goes on a co-op either.
Some either aren't ready, or there may not be capacity.
Or there may not be capacity, so that we have to make sure that that work-based learning experience is multiple tiered, and that's where the tours come in, even though it's not a direct, that's where our panel discussions come in that we'll be doing as a region. Yes, speakers come in, so there's other ways that work-based learning experience can be
attending a tech center.
Yeah.
And exactly. And there's a lot of work we're doing on building capacity too. There may be limits to capacity in certain areas. We have high schools that are in the middle of incredibly rural communities that have no stoplights, maybe not even stop signs, and very few, if any, businesses. And so some of those high schools really, those kids either need to travel or they need to figure out another way to get those experiences. For us, just seeing the schools teaching the curriculum and making sure that the students are career ready is a really big benefit of the statewide TIPS effort. But then the internship piece is really important to take a look at that capacity. So we're doing some work to build capacity with the Department of Work, the Business Roundtable, and Vermont SHRM, because there are a lot of employers out there that have never opened their doors to internships, and some that feel like they've been reaching out to schools but not getting any responses.
That's right. We heard that.
So we have some employers who say, oh, every year we tell, a lot of banks tell us this, that, oh, we always offer internship opportunities and schools don't call us. So they don't know who to connect with. They don't know how to connect with the co-op coordinators or the work-based learning coordinators at the school. So there's a lot of work that could be done that I think could increase capacity. And in some cases, some businesses may be turned down because they're not a great placement for one reason or another. And a lot of times it's because they're just not prepared. They don't know how to offer good internship opportunities. So we're working on that too. So I think there's a lot of room to build capacity. I haven't seen us get to the point where we've reached capacity in any community, but we do have to get creative.
I just have one other question. In the stuff you handed out, the proficiencies and indicators, when we visit businesses, we hear about being part of a team. I don't see where that's mentioned there's a little talk about collaboration, but not about teamwork, being part of a team. We hear that very often.
You know, and Tim, you do bring up a good point, and I didn't notice that because when I speak in Mary's classroom especially, I talk about the changes I went through at GE. When I first started, you stood there and you did your job at your workstation, whatever it is, and you were you were rated on that activity you did right here. And when I left, it was all team building stuff, and that an individual now has to be able to do that work themselves as far as in a group as well. And I hadn't noticed that because it is.
They do have, the first thing I was going to say is we abbreviated some of these. You can see that some of these are very long statements, and we abbreviated them to fit in this column on this one-page spreadsheet. So there is more information here, but I'm looking at the collaboration one. So under 3F, identify opportunities for innovation and collaboration. So it doesn't talk a lot about skills for working on a team. So I'd have to dig into the scoring criteria for that.
Good catch.
And find.
One of your original, if you go back, you had the 5. We'll go back again. Earlier than that.
Oh, the PowerPoint slide?
Yeah, and then I think you had 5.
Yeah, it's in the performance indicators, not the
that right
goal.
It wasn't included.
Right, so it falls under, interestingly, 3, which is creative and practical problem solving.
Oh,
It's
as a
where
team.
collaboration is. It's a performance indicator to do problem solving as a team. So it might not be getting at exactly what you're saying, but they've got it there. But you're right, it's not in one of the headings, but it's an indicator within it.
I would share that. It seems to be a big issue for
Yeah,
So maybe
bring
it
it out
should
to the front a little bit more.
Bring it to the front, yeah. So that
Some school, I mean, these are the ones the state provided, so a lot of schools have taken these and made it their own. So I know, for example, Enosburg made collaboration is its own goal with its own performance indicator, so they broke it out.
Okay.
So those are just.
It's under 3.
it is.
It's under number 1.
You don't see the word team though.
It's collaborate.
You don't see the word team, and maybe team is what needs to be there someplace.
Yeah. And did you have something else?
I want to make a comment around the capacity and work that we have to be done, which is part of the hub. I was meeting with a very large local employer that I work with a lot throughout the school year for many of my programs, but one in particular, and I had a request that we get together a list of who all the people are, because they're being contacted by so many different people, and that the head person who coordinates all of it is getting confused. And so it just highlights the work we have to do.
And I think that even within the mainstream classroom, if that's what I'd like to say, because I got an email for a request by a math teacher that is looking for a tour within industry where there's a high math focus. And that's wonderful. And I will be in touch with that instructor. But there's another avenue that they should be following, you know, especially that they're in a high school, there's support there, and then it would find its way to the hub, because I will be setting up tours, and we will make sure that they're math intensive organizations.
There's only so much of you to go around.
That's
for
right.
requests
So,
like that, and that's why the
right.
work-based learning coordinator in the school could be the first point
That's
of contact.
what I'm saying.
And if they get stuck, they can come to you, or if they know about something that's happening on a regional level,
and
they can plug that person into that.
That's right, and that's what this is. It's a matter of putting it in to the fact that we will be doing a math intensive industry tour here in the future. So if they have followed the right path.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I know.
People making those requests.
If I could just mention my grant program as well, which is fully underutilized currently, but we have set aside monies for this work-based learning. So if you have employer partners that are getting them on board, part of our carve-out legislation
I didn't
2
realize
years
that was
ago,
part of the carve-out.
I was at the work-based learning, whatever it was, there, the statewide one, but we can, so if you get an employer partner that's going to do 9 interns a semester, a school year for 32 hours, we can get them to put the plan together, and we can offset 50% of the hourly rates of their employees that are part of this. So it's a great carrot to use, not just for existing. So it's not an internship like a college internship, because 1 or 2 employers would eat all of our money in a summer. It's really for, the language says, a work-based learning activity with a school. Basically can be post-secondary as well. So
We should talk more about that because there might be some of the hub activity like these big panels that I want to do in February.
So I present it to employers that I meet with because workforce is what I do, and that's always there's just not enough people, there's not enough whatever. So certainly, I have business cards, or Kathy's got my contact. I'm always happy to get people.
I think that's a great incentive too for some of the schools that are building their programs, they could be a carrot to help them
Happy
build
to meet with the work-based learning people at the employers as well.
Pipeline development activities is what it's called, reading.
Okay, well, thank you, Kathy. For those of you, we filmed this, so you're all movie stars now. But Kathy and Wynn and I are headed over to Northwest Access TV, and thank you to our camera guy in the back there.
That's lame.
We're headed over to Northwest Access TV to do a 1-hour programming. It'll be a lot very similar to this, but it'll just run on some different streams. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.